So, Rebecca, I've been getting into recording and writing and arranging and playing music lately, which means that I've been futzing around with different musical equipment and interfaces and drivers and software, which means that some of the time something will go wrong and there will be a weird buzz or crackle in the recording and it'll be annoying and I won't know of it until I am editing. And so to the dear listeners out there, if any of my content, video or audio, has some kind of weird crackle, believe me, I know it's there and I'm desperately trying to address it. And I apologize. I take audio quality extremely seriously and voice
seriously.
Very, very seriously. So let's watch out for that. But in the meantime, in between the crackles, let's answer some emails, Rebecca.
Do we want to get into the experience?
Oh, please, yeah. You texted me this morning.
Yeah. So I witnessed a really horrific light rail versus person accident, and I've been thinking a lot about it and thinking about my own brain and trauma, and I thought it might be helpful to talk through a recent traumatic event. So first off, the last time we podcasted, someone didn't know who I was. My name is Rebecca Bloom. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I specialize in adults with complex post-traumatic stress in South Seattle. And
you're an old friend of mine from...
Old.
We were the two young professors at Antioch University.
And then all of a sudden, now we're old.
And then all of a sudden we were not the young ones.
So for folks who aren't familiar with Seattle, we have a fairly new mass transit light rail system. And through the poorest neighborhood, it runs at street level. It's not above ground. And I think the article said 50 people or 100 people have been struck since it has been put in. There's all kinds of dinging and crosswalk alarms, and there's like a zigzag crosswalk, so like you can't just cross the tracks.
Yeah, it's pretty confusing. I mean, I'm guessing people in Europe can understand all the bike and the light rail and the car and the bus lanes and everything. But for us simpletons in Seattle that are used to just
getting in
everything being oriented around a car, it is a little daunting, the lights and the signs and some of those intersections on MLK, because it's mainly going down MLK, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King Jr. way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Down in your neck of the woods.
Right. So when I come home, the way that I come home where I don't have to cross Rainier coming out of my business, which is its own set of terrifying, people die on that road. People die in Rainier all the time. So I can either take a left onto Rainier, which when it's dark, it's like, I don't want to do that. So I end up on Orcas, which should be the safe way going home. Light rail goes back and forth every 7 minutes or something, like 12 minutes. It's like very common. So I'm coming down Orcas, which is steep, and I see the train is in the middle of the road. And I was like, that happens from time to time. Like there's a backup or something. And now I'm car number 3 or 2 and the backup
Meaning that the light rail was blocking the intersection so people couldn't go through.
Yeah, it's completely blocking Orcas. You can't go through. Yeah. And so my brain is like kind of assessing what's going on. Like, why would it be stopped? And so the train is very brightly lit so I can see inside, and everybody inside seems fine. So I'm like, there's no fire inside the train or something. And then I start noticing there's all these objects strewn all around the street. And people are starting to rush to this one.
So you got there right as it happened.
I could not believe it. And the next day I'm leading a 6-hour training on Zoom. So I'm already thinking as I get out of work, I'm not turning left on Rainier because I'm like, I need to not get in an accident right now. I need a chill night. I need my food order to get there on time and be correct. I need a good night's sleep. And my brain is starting to realize something horrible has happened. And then I can see the body under the train. And my brain starts to, I'm just assuming that's a dead body, because like, how else? I just can't make any sense of what I'm seeing. And then I'm sitting there and I'm assessing, like, do I need to get out of my car and help? I really don't have it in me right now to be that person. And in the moment that I keep trying to go back to, it's then I realize all these people are rushing in to help, and I don't have to be that person today. So like, you know, brain, and like more and more cars are backing up, and it's backing up the other way, and I don't hear any sirens yet, but it's like any minute. Then I think I got to clear out of here because this is only going to get worse. I do stop at the light rail station that's a little further up trying to get people's attention. And all I can say is someone just got hit down the road. This train is not coming. Like, you should find some other way to get wherever you're going because nothing's moving for a while. And then in the modern age, like, I get home and I start scrolling, you know, Seattle police, you know, fire department, 911 call center, like trying to figure it out. And there's this huge ring. Like, I never really looked at it before, but it's like some calls get like a tiny dot, and this call gets like this like massive.
I wonder if it's based on how many calls are made.
Yeah, or how many vehicles need to come to help. Because I saw an overhead picture later, and it was like fire trucks, ambulances, like everybody.
Yeah.
So I'm following the story pretty compulsively. And then they say he was alive at the time. So the Trauma Treatment Center for 5 states is
Just down the street from there.
basically. So it's then announced that he did lose a leg, but he survived.
Wow.
And I thought, oh my God, was it because he was like...
Did you say he was on a wheelchair?
He was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Gets hit by a train. Gets stuck. I mean, what it looked like to me was there was a body under the train. Like, gets stuck under the train. Or dragged by the train.
So when you're obsessing that night, how are you feeling?
I felt so fucked up. And so worried about the next day. Like, how am I going to do this? You know, I reached out to the people closest to me to just let them know, like, hey, I'm in really bad shape. I just saw something, you know, people in war-torn countries see stuff like this every day, but
Was it that feeling, you know, there's different kinds of fucked up feelings, but the feeling that I would imagine I would feel in a situation like that would be this adrenaline both ramping and the after effects. You know, the after effects of adrenaline is like shakiness and feeling out of sorts, like you're disconnected from the world or your body or something. Not like true dissociation, but...
I felt both exhausted and wired.
Right.
Like, kept refreshing, looking for more news. I posted on the local Facebook group just like, hey, you know, anyone who's trying to get anywhere right now, just know that this just happened. And other people start posting, oh yeah, I was at the station just south, and they're putting everyone on buses and moving them around the accident. And so that was kind of sweet that there was like people were trying to help each other out. Because also this is like rush hour, right? Like rush hour in Seattle is already insane in the idea that like you may not be able to get home. So I both desperately wanted to care for my community, and I was like, I'm drawing from like vapor fumes right now.
Well, you see something that is potentially traumatizing, and that feeling, you know, and it also sounds like a mixture of also the feeling of, I know, sort of anticipatory trauma, if you will. Like, I know what this does to me, and I was hoping to have a clean night and a clean day the next day so that I could, you know, I've been looking forward to this. I want to do a good job. I need to be on point. I can't be frazzled from experience. And so you had a lot of different feelings in that moment. And also sounds like a feeling of not wanting to be alone.
Yeah. Or needing to just talk it out.
Yeah.
Like, that was really fucking scary.
Yeah.
In my brain, I'm still wrestling with, I think I just saw a dead body. Like,
Yeah.
and to, I mean, it was just so horrific. Like, these, anybody that's, these trains are huge. They're not going that fast, but you're not going to win in a fight against a light rail train.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whoever this person is who survived, man, they're a freaking miracle. Like, it said the first responders put a tourniquet on, but I was like, just can't even imagine that job. Those first responders. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And this is all in a day's work for them.
They must have got there fast.
Yeah. Yeah. They were not there when I was there, but by the time I got home, the pictures of the accident scene had them there. So, yeah. And then whisked, I'm sure, right off to Harborview, where they're like the best trauma surgeons for 5 states. So, yeah. So.
How you feeling now?
I feel like I really need to talk about it. I mean, I wrote you this morning and I was like, can I talk about this? Because it really got me thinking about my own brain and trauma. I've been talking a lot about it with some clients who've experienced trauma. This time is so traumatic, but like kind of the trauma, the systems seem so big and the systems that are breaking are so big. So to have something that's just so clear, like something went horribly wrong and the right people showed up to help and they did help. Like there was a way in which like, oh, this is like a trauma I can process, versus, these kind of like transgender people are under attack in every way imaginable. Like that's like,
well, the analogy, and this is just me trying to fit it into my way of seeing things, and I could be just delusional or rose-colored glasses, but Washington State, every state of the Union has its own Supreme Court, its own governor, its own representatives, our own senators, our own public health system, our own criminal justice system, our own district attorneys and prosecutors and culture and voting base and tax policy and budget for government funds. And we, every state has, in some instances, extremely drastic differences in the law, whether it's laws regarding how much pollution a car can pump into the atmosphere, or the sale of assault weapons, or how to fund the certain infrastructure like public transit. But also in this hyper Twitter world and the fear-based clicking and the real things that are happening, I think an over-indexing of, or at least a lack of paying attention to local. And in that instance, you saw something horrible happen, and from your take on it, a lot of people did a lot of good stuff that they didn't have to do.
Yeah.
And took care of it, and you didn't have to do anything. And so
what if everybody did everything right?
So when it comes to, Washington State, Seattle in particular, whatever the feds want to do or whatever particular politicians want to do, Seattle ain't going to let that happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think I really needed to see that people are good. And this was a horrible way to have to see it. I also noticed that like every interaction like delights me right now these days. So I think because of this, I've done a little clearing out of objects in my life. Like there was a little like, let's make the house a little calmer. And I felt ready to but to trade in a lot of my mom's poetry books, like 2 huge bags. And there's a very famous bookstore on Capitol Hill called Twice Told Tales. which has it's famous for having shop cats. And the woman that runs the store has been running it since forever.
I'm surprised it's still there, honestly. Because a lot of those little bookstores in Seattle have gone, I mean,
Yeah.
because of you can buy used books online now.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say I was there midday on a Monday and it was like hopping.
Yeah.
Like I walked in with my 2 huge bags of books and she yelled out, "Please don't have any books." And like the counter was covered in books and there was 2 people before me and all this stuff was happening. And she was so...
Yeah, unless you have a signed copy of some obscure book that would complement their shelf on, I don't know, how to travel Sicily on a budget or something, like you're doomed. It's just gone are the days when you could just drop off a box of books, you know?
Well, so I have all of these poetry books from the 60s and the 70s. And she took every...
Oh, you're talking about your mom's poetry books that she bought of other poets. I thought you were talking about your mom's poetry.
No, not her own poetry.
Because I was going to say that's going to be a harder sell.
No. This is like Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Sylvia Plath. Oh my God, of that ilk.
Yeah.
And she is delighted. Like she starts reciting poetry as we're sitting there. But I was like, would this instance seem so delightful if Thursday night hadn't happened? But suddenly I'm like, look, people are good and want to engage. And I will say I gave away I traded in 2 full bags of books. I walked out with 4 that was $12 over the trade-in price. She made money on that deal. But yeah, so I have been looking for good where I can find it. And luckily I've been finding it.
How'd the training go?
It went really well, all things considered. I want to thank so much the admin on the call. I told her at the beginning of the call before anybody signs in. We sign on a half hour early to go through tech and just shoot the shit. And I was like, look, I had a real bad experience last night. And she was very understanding and supportive. So that was nice. But by the end of the day, I was like toasted. Like I just had nothing.
Right.
And that way that like at the end, usually like I'm kind of fun and can like answer questions and just be available. I was just like, this day is over.
Yeah.
And then I immediately lied down on the couch and slept for 2 hours. Like my body was just spent and my back hurt and my neck hurt. There was a way that I was just like physically achy that was not typical.
Yeah.
It was not a typical day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you dealt with it in a healthy way. You paid attention to your body and your mind, and you did what felt like a way of getting through it and healing and reaching out, telling others, valuing. I mean, I guess that's a big thing that you could model for everyone is that even before it happened, in a way, you're modeling for the listeners to take care of yourself and to value yourself and not feel like you're being overly sensitive or a prima donna or narcissistic or something. You're just like, look, I know myself, I know humans, and I'm not gonna act like those sensitivities aren't real. And something's happening. Okay, first, are they okay? Looks like other people are responding. Okay, now am I okay? What's happening for me? So I think that's a good model for everybody.
Yeah, and I let people know I was messed up, and I didn't hold it inside to myself and think like I can get through this by myself, because I could not have gotten through that holding it inside. I would have gotten an ulcer.
Yeah.
And everybody was so understanding. Like, that's terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, I have seen that on Reddit, actually, over the last 15 years of using Reddit. It's weird. Reddit has its own microcultures and also just generally speaking has its own subculture that's not, it's sort of like when you go on Twitter, especially in certain algorithms, you can be convinced that this is what America is like or this is what people are like. And then you actually talk to people who don't use Twitter very often, or they don't comment, or they don't post, and you realize, oh, the loud voices on Twitter aren't necessarily representative of the larger group. It can feel that way sometimes, but it definitely is not that way. And Reddit, it can be that way. But one of the things that I've noticed is that I follow a lot of channels that have to do with like when you talked about somewhat, how dangerous a light rail or a train can be, even at slow speeds. I saw this video recently of these people in, I believe, let's see, where were they? I think they were in Mexico. And it was a train that was, I think, retiring, and a bunch of people were kind of excited about it coming into its last, I don't know, you call it garage or something. And there were a lot of people.
It's called a barn.
A barn. It is?
Yes.
Officially?
Yes.
A train barn?
Yes.
Huh. Okay. And so there were a lot of people around the train tracks. It was coming down, and people were taking video and pictures and stuff. And this one woman was taking a selfie.
Oh, God.
And she got hit. I mean, it just clipped her like a protrusion on the engine, just caught her head.
Oh, shit.
And I don't know if she lived or died, but it didn't look pretty. And a lot of the comments had to do with not only just the tragedy for the individual, and also people saying, trains don't mess around.
Yeah.
Like, don't turn your back on a train.
Yeah.
And steer clear. And the Mexican government were telling people, stay 10 feet back at least. And none of these people were 10 feet back. But there was a sizable group of people that were saying that the people that had witnessed this firsthand probably are going to have trauma for the rest of their lives. Yeah. And like serious worry for the bystanders and what looked to be maybe her son who was right there with her. That's interesting because that's an advanced level understanding of trauma because it's not happening to them, right? You rewind the clock even just 50 years or even today to some extent, a lot of clinicians in our field don't recognize that those events can be trauma. I mean, officially, like in the DSM, I don't even think it qualifies for PTSD
it's
because
being in a car accident. It's not witnessing. I actually had a client. This was the treatment. They had witnessed a car accident, and it messed them up horribly.
Yeah, I mean, while I'm on this topic, the obvious criteria change to the PTSD criteria list, because originally it was. Like way back, it had to do with like war trauma, right? So like witnessing someone dying or almost dying yourself. I think it was probably the original shell shock, war trauma criterion. Then they started to expand it to having been sexually assaulted, and then I can't remember what's in the DSM-5 TR, but it's grown in its list.
Well, and they just added getting fired from a job, losing a job, which I had a client that was the issue, and I was like, at the time, I couldn't make a official PTSD diagnosis on that issue. She had other issues that we were able to cover it for, but now they've added it, and I think that's like it just admits what people's lives are actually like. Yeah,
well, I've had people have PTSD from having very suddenly discovered that their spouse was cheating, and to me, the obvious wording of the criterion, they should just scrap because they keep adding other things. And the underlying feature is terror.
Yeah. An event
so any event that causes significant terror in the individual suffices as a criterion that, has been shown to sometimes in some people produce the long-term effects that we call PTSD. So witnessing something like that or even just seeing it on the news.
I mean, right. I mean, that's why they learned in September 11th, like, don't show the footage over and over and over and over and over again. It traumatizes people. So tonight will be the first night that I'll drive by that intersection again. So I'll let you know how it goes.
Let's take a break and we get back. Some emails. What do you say?
Yes.
All right, we're back from the break. So, Rebecca, as a reward for modeling for the listeners how to take care of oneself, I have some merch for you. Merch. So, there's a shirt.
Presents.
a Rebecca Sode shirt for you. Or no, take care of yourself. Because you deserve it. Stacy chose that color specifically for you.
Thank you.
And
these are my night-night shirts.
Good. Sometimes me too, yeah. And then, does that have is that openable?
Yes. I got a mug.
Yeah, you got a
my
mug.
God.
A take care of yourself mug.
So, dear listeners, I'm having the worst
Or
time.
a tumbler, I guess.
A tumbler,
like
yes.
a travel tumbler.
Which I requested because I'm having the worst time. So I thought I bought a tumbler that would fit in the holder of my car. And it was full of mushroom coffee with coconut creamer. And I get to my car and it doesn't fit in the holder. And so I put it kind of at an edge.
Oof.
And it spills all over the entire car, causes a total mess. So then I go to Marshall's where I solve all my problems. And I thought I bought a tumbler there, fill it up with mushroom coffee. I'm putting stuff in my trunk, trying to balance my coffee. And the top just comes flying off. This isn't a review of any other product at Marshall's, just this single mug. It goes flying off. Coffee spills all over my pants, all over the street.
Oh, my God.
So finally I got one of those super vacuum sealed, then I start looking for reviews will not ever open unless you open it.
Yeah. If anything, the merch that Stacy has investigated, the top is almost too hard to get off sometimes.
Which is good if you're me, because I'm incredibly clumsy and things go flying all the time. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and I use, I'm using one right now. I use these tumblers at home because I don't know, they have a lot of capacity because I like to. What I make is I make a cup of half decaf, half calf because I love coffee so much. I don't want to have just a little bit of coffee, but I also don't want to have all that caffeine. So, plus this tumbler is great because it keeps it warm pretty long, and especially if you put the top on. I only put the top on if I'm leaving the house, and sometimes I'll come back to the car 2 hours later, still be warm.
Wow!
And it's just especially if you close it, it's kind of amazing. Anyway, let's also do an OPP. These people became patrons a while back. I've been wanting to specifically highlight patrons that are middle and upper tier. So these are annual middle tier patrons who became...
And these are the people that keep us running. This whole thing is a miracle.
Yeah, it is quite a miracle. These people became patrons about 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago, and they've stayed middle tier, annual middle tier patrons. We have Steph from Medicine Hat, Alberta, Patty from Vancouver, BC.
I need to get back up there.
Megan from Alameda, California.
Right.
Mayumi from Kenmore, Washington. Sounds like a
local
Japanese sister. And Just Cuz from Rockville, Maryland. Which reminds me of the REM song Don't Go Back to Rockville. And then at the mug level, we have Maya from God knows where. And at the highest tier, we have Madison, also from beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia.
We love our brethren up to the north.
That's right. And
so I arrived here. So it was 22 degrees last night. And
very cold.
Very cold for here. And I arrived here touting my fancy Canadian fuzzy boots.
Yeah.
Praising those in Canada that
for those who are trying to
us...
visualize, they're basically if Vans and Uggs had a child. I'm assuming the Vans would be the dude, and the Ugg girl showed up at a skater party, and one thing led to another, and then your boots
were born.
Yeah. Okay, so email. Annual patron art teacher from Stockholm, Sweden.
Oh.
She says, "Thank you so much for all the incredible work you do. I am a primary school art teacher in Stockholm, and I've been following your content for years. It's helped me more than I can say. I'm also intersex, and go by Mix Alex, MX,
Yes.
Mix Alex, which is different from Mrs. or Ms. or Mr. I'm also intersex, and I go by Mix Alex, which has opened up meaningful conversations with my students, especially those questioning their gender. Quite a few have confided in me over the years, often sharing their doubts about their gender. How can I support students impacted by these practices without putting down their homeroom teachers? It's quite a few have confided in me. How can I support?
So it sounds like they're the cool teacher that
Yeah.
people can have these conversations with.
How can I support impacted by practices without putting down their homeroom teachers? And how can I think I might have deleted something from this email because from my memory, but I don't want to say this without knowing for sure. I thought that Mix Alex was talking about how others are pushing back, maybe other teachers or other parents, but I don't want to put words in their mouth. How can I support students impacted by these practices without putting down their homeroom teachers? And how can I get more staff on board with the importance of gender inclusivity? Rebecca, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is a long road. Not everybody. I still have friends who are like, who can't do it. And here in Seattle, we've had 30 years to practice this.
Practice what exactly?
Practice speaking about gender in a non-binary way, understanding that gender is a social construct and can present in all kinds of ways, and also knowing that bodies can look all kinds of ways. There's this great book called Getting to They Them, which I give out the most often, and people are just delighted by it. It's a graphic novel about non-binary existence. So one way is sharing information. A lot of people don't understand that it's always existed. Some people seem to think like this is a magic thing that's happening now and needs to be fought back against, not understanding that it's always happened in the margins, and now you just happen to be hearing about it for the first time. So there's that. It's also knowing that some people just aren't going to come along for the ride. I am always amazed how intensely people dig in about this, as if it's going to really matter to them, as if respecting someone's pronouns is somehow an injury to them or some line in the sand that they have to hold.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up because that I think is important to highlight with this question is that humans are inherently, we like to think of ourselves as apex predators, and we are now, but we were not for 99.999% of our
as of
evolution.
Like 100 years ago, we could have been taken out by we still are.
Yeah, trains, for example.
Hippos.
But also cats, leopards and panthers and tigers and
Snakes.
lions would regularly prey on us, hyenas, and
Wolves.
there's evidence that we were the prey. We were like deer or gazelles, and we are ever watchful. Now we were also predators, but we were, semi-naked, not very strong, weak species compared to other species on the African savanna during the Pleistocene, and dependent on each other, and also dependent on our emotional herd-like signaling of danger. And so we're afraid of things that we're not familiar with. We evolved to be suspicious or ever watchful of things that we can't really categorize or things that seem different. So there's a tendency for that. And people are being brainwashed to otherize and to be fearful in a lot of different ways. And so the first thing that we should always be mindful of if we're trying to change other people's minds or we're trying to help them relax is to appreciate just how scary it is for them. It doesn't mean it's our job to solve that. It's their job to look past the brainwashing. But if we want to actually move the ball forward, we have to appreciate that and have some empathy around that and
know that
attend
it's
to
not
that,
a
not to
single-
accommodate it,
right.
not to say because you have this weird brainwashing fear, therefore I'm going to stay in the closet. No, what I mean is like, how do you approach someone in a way that works against their brainwashing so that they can feel at ease?
And it's not a single conversation. So, we're talking about
you're coming
changing-
apart. Your hair's coming out of
I
your
know.
head.
I'm like, it's coming
Rebecca
out in
just
clumps.
randomly like
Touch myself in like a whole huge. There's still
some
more.
hairs are coming out.
I'm gonna leave like half my head on the floor. This is what stress does. So did you never taught multicultural?
No.
Okay, so I taught it 8 or 9 times, and that is the class where you try and explain that racism and other forms of isms exist and impact mental health.
Yeah, and it's typically taken in the first or second quarter.
Yeah, and if students don't pass this class, they couldn't move on.
Yeah.
It's now in question whether this class is going to be able to be taught in some states. Currently, it can't be taught in Florida, and it's a requirement for the national accreditation. Anyways, long story. But I would sit with people. It was a 3-hour class for 10 weeks, and try and explain that racism existed and that they were going to have to deal with it, their client's experience of racism, and to find empathy and understand that their client's experience was different than theirs.
In context, most students back then particularly were white women.
Yes.
So.
And, one of the first things that would come up, somebody would always kind of get into like, oh, reverse racism. And I would like have to shut that shit down on site, like explaining that we all have personal biases, but know that there are institutional systems at play that impact someone's life way differently than clearly if you're saying that to me, than you can ever imagine. But it was like, I had to know like week 1 that I'm not going to fix this problem. I've got 30 hours to address it.
To contrast with what Mix Alex is going through and what other people are going through, I always loved the luxury of that format because I had 10 weeks. I had all that time. I could assign readings. I can assign reflection papers. I can facilitate discussions in class. I can go slow. And I can also require competency demonstrations that demonstrate from the student that they have grown, that they've absorbed this. And it was still hard. I can't imagine if you don't have that
right,
luxury.
If you're in a workplace and somebody
you only have literally like 5 seconds to say something.
Right.
And what do you say? It's hard. I will say that Mix Alex, you're doing enough as is by being visible in this way, by saying my name is Mix Alex, which creates a conversation among all the other things that you're doing, because research shows and anecdote shows that the way to change is for brave people like yourself to step forward and be visible, and for people to realize that there's nothing to be fucking afraid of.
Yeah, and that there can be. So have I told the conversation about my dad's wife getting to they, them?
No.
Oh, such a good story.
Dance wife.
My dad's wife.
Oh, your dad's wife.
Yeah.
I thought you said your dance wife.
My dad. I wish I had a dance wife.
I know. I was like, is this some sort of lesbian thing? This is a dance wife.
Isn't it like a work wife? You have a dance wife.
Right.
There are probably people who have dance wives. So we've been they theming it at my house for a while, and I don't want to out her in any way. She's in her early 70s, and the last time we were there, we had the most interesting conversation where she said, "Wait a second, language has changed in my lifetime. Her generation demanded the moniker Ms., MS, not Miss, that you weren't married, and not Mrs., that you were married and used your husband's name out in public and for correspondence."
Yeah, for people that aren't old enough, it might sound strange and far from the mark, but it was a huge feminist movement and quite a success story, because women were not only they had to either be Miss or like MISS or Mrs. MRS, right? Whether they were married or not. But a lot of time, my mom would get mail for Mrs. Allen Honda, like from the bank and shit. She wasn't even a person.
Yeah.
She was Mrs. Allen Honda. And I would notice, I was like, gee, that doesn't seem, why would, my mom has a name. I'm pretty sure it's Mommy, but just use that,
Mommy Honda.
Yeah.
Why isn't this addressed to Ms. Mommy Honda?
Yeah. And so there was this huge feminist movement to say, look, we're not defined by whether or not we are married or not. And so we're going to change the whole thing. Mr. is Mr. if he's married or Mr. if he's not. So we need ours. And so it'll be MS, it'll be Ms. And of course, there was a huge backlash, and even among women that were saying it was going too far or it was getting away from traditional values or something, but certainly from men and conservatives. And it worked. And from my memory, a lot of people, normies, would change their moniker to MS, right?
Yeah, now
MS.
it's an option in every format. Yeah, I use it.
But in today's world, it's
Can you imagine? Never.
But it's so...
We would never go back.
It's so antiquated.
God. Oh my God!
It's just this. It's a little step forward, right? And so, yeah. Similarly, you and I are old and have seen huge changes, not only in culture but also in language. Just the fact that a lot of people even know what intersex is, or obviously what trans or what cis is. These are words that. I'm going to guess and say 25 years ago, only like 3% of Americans knew what they meant.
Yeah. So it was really interesting to watch her process. Like, maybe I can use they in the singular. If all of those people switched to using Ms., maybe I can use they. And this is several years into this dialogue. So I just want to say that behavior change is possible. Continue to be a support for those students. They're going to remember you for the rest of their lives. When I think of the high school teachers who saw me and said, even though you can't spell to save your life, Rebecca, you're special. I can see something special in you. For these students where you are the safe place, they will never, ever forget you. All the adults and conservative kids in the room, you may not see the change in them. It doesn't mean it's not possible. It just means that for some people, this is a process that can't happen or it's extremely slow.
I've seen it where you have a conservative, highly religious, fundamentalist Mormon who would normally be extremely against, say, gay people or trans people. And then they have a close family member that comes out, and within 5 minutes, they change their mind because it just doesn't compute to them. They love this person and respect this person, and that person doesn't represent the propaganda that's being given to them, and they just change their mind. So people are good. People can change if they're given a chance. But, most people, they're sitting in their lazy boy watching Fox News, and they're afraid of their neighbors, and they don't talk to anyone on the way to the store, and their echo chamber is such that they just have no contact. They're in this completely different reality. And by, again, Mix Alex, just being out,
that's huge. You're influencing people
will
that you don't know.
absolutely change people's minds.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's
take a break. We get back. More emails. What do you say?
Okay.
This email is from patron Simone. Simone says, I've been a patron since 2019. I'm also an artist that made your anniversary trolls. Oh, the anniversary trolls. I have my version of the anniversary troll behind me. Simone says, I have a listener question, meaning that I love the anniversary troll. That's the whole point. I have a listener question. Hope this is the right place to send it. I live in Los Angeles. My question is, what is the best way to act sympathetically towards people when they have lost their home or endured a similar catastrophe? I know several people who have either lost homes in Los Angeles to the fires a couple weeks ago. So this email was a while back. For example, I have a doctor appointment coming up, and I was told the doctor lost her home in the Palisades fire. I want to be sympathetic, but I also want to be diplomatic since we will be having a professional visit that I will be paying for. Rebecca, what should Simone do?
I mean, I think it's best to kind of just check in. You can always say, I'm thinking about you. I'm sorry for your loss. Like, that is something you can always say to someone. If they want to say more, they probably will at that time. I imagine it must be so hard right now for all of those folks who've lost everything in the fire to then go show up to work every day. But they also probably need work. I mean, I know when I've been through a crisis, it's been so nice to have somewhere to go and do the thing. So I would really watch their lead and let them kind of control what happens, especially in a professional environment. Throwing somebody off their game, it's like, don't do that.
Meaning, don't like corner them.
Yes.
And say like, you must be going through a lot. And let's say the doctor is like, yeah, it's been tough. But anyway, so let's get back to your medical. And you're just like, well, I just really want to.
How are you?
You're right. You don't, like, as you say, follow their lead. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's wonderful, Simone, that you care and that you want to help. And sometimes maybe just say that. This is my style. I don't know if this is always the best, but I always try to get back to the fundamentals. So like for me, if I'm in a situation like that, Simone, I would care. That would be the first thought. And then I would have these fears of asking too much or not saying the right thing. And then I think for a lot of people, or my impulse anyway, is to try to solve that problem by coming up with the perfect thing to say or something. But my style is, when I'm at my best, is to go back to the beginning. So I would just be as blunt as possible from the start and not try to game the system. So I would say something like, so I heard about you lost your house in the fire. When I first heard that, I just can't imagine what you're going through. That sounds really tough. And, I like you as my doctor, and I just, I'm just really sad about that. Also, I'm a little afraid that I would say too much and corner you, so I don't want to pressure you to talk about anything since you're at work. Also, I have this medical problem that I'm like kind of worried about. So, but I don't want to be selfish. That's just me.
Yeah.
That's how I don't know if that's always best, but I find that I like to level with people and because if I try to game it, then I run the risk of coming across in a completely different way than I was hoping to,
Well, and also, I'm always surprised. Did I tell a story about giving my skin doctor the tarot deck the last time I was here?
I don't think so.
Okay. So skin cancer runs really intensely in my family. My mom died of a type of cancer that only 7 people in the world, there were only 7 cases of it in the world. So I got...
And it originated in skin cancer?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
That year, there were only 7 cases. So there was a while that I was going in every 6 months as they were really kind of watching me. So I saw my skin doctor a lot. And he has a great bedside manner. And I told him about the tarot deck, and he said he went in to see it a couple times. And I kept trying to remember to bring it. But, when you do something every 6 months, and it's like, I would just forget. And so I finally brought the tarot deck to the doctor's appointment. The doctor pulled a tarot card. I pulled a tarot card. The medical assistant pulled a tarot card. We had a great time. And then he went to give the deck back to me, and I was like, no, this is for you. Like, thank you for watching me for the last 2 years, which has been absolutely terrifying. I got a completely clean bill of health, and I don't have to come back for a year, which is great. But I was kind of amazed as like, oh, you don't usually get gifts on the job. I have a coworker in my suite of offices that's always bringing in food, and every time she goes somewhere, she brings me back something. And I was like, oh, this is really sweet and kind. And for those of us who are in the service profession, we don't get a lot of gifts, except if you're Kirk Honda and you get a glass apple every year for being Kirk Honda. So
why do you say that? My mom gave me a glass apple, and it was a gift to her grandma, or to her mom, my grandma. You're talking about,
Awards.
Well, I got a troll from Simone.
Yeah. I got
Right.
a duck and you got a duck. We get lots of gifts, but that's
Yeah.
not usually why people are in this
No.
work. So I would say, like, if you really want to do something extra for your doctor or anybody, like, bring them a gift, something heartfelt. Doesn't have to be expensive, something that means something to you, something from the heart where you're just like, this means a lot to me, and I just want to know that somebody cares about you.
Mm-hmm. Or even just a handwritten card or something can go a long way. Yeah. I mean, just the thought that counts, that you care. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, especially I've been in touch with a couple of my friends who live in LA, and everybody just sounds depleted and exhausted, and the air was toxic for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I'm sure any act of kindness that you give, where you expect nothing in return, and where you're not crying when you give it, if you can give it from a grounded place, I'm sure it'll be appreciated.
Yeah, good advice. Annual long-term patron Natasha from California, good old Natasha from California. She writes in a lot. I met her. You might have met her. You might have met her at a live event. Anyway, she writes in, "Hi, Kirk and Rebecca. Hope you're doing well, all things considered," she says. "I was out with a friend recently at the Crescent Lounge on Capitol Hill.
Yes.
And I made an offhand comment about being Jewish. And my friend said something about responsibility for the babies dying in Palestine, which seems to be a commonly circulating sentiment recently, as if I personally have any control over genocide overseas. I was hoping for advice from Rebecca on where anti-Zionist Jews can congregate in Seattle.
Yeah.
I've been to a couple synagogues where that were very pro-Israel, and it felt very uncomfortable. Any words of encouragement are appreciated."
Yeah. So first off, you sent me these questions ahead of time, and we're a week late because it snowed when we were supposed to meet. So I forgot about some of these questions. But actually, when I read this question, I knew the answer, and I was afraid to say it on the air because I was afraid of that temple getting attacked. So we will send Natasha the temple that I'm thinking of.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
That's not as...
It's completely pro-Palestine, this temple. And the rabbi there has gotten in trouble. When this...
Trouble with who?
With other Jews. And they're the only out pro-Palestinian rabbi in Seattle. But there's a congregation where you will feel comfortable. But this idea that like any one person is responsible for the atrocities of a government that you have had no contact with. I mean, this is what anti-Semitism in the left looks like, right? Like, it's your fault that this is happening. You're not doing enough, as if Jews are like some monolithic group and we get on a call every week and like decide what's going to happen next. We are hugely diverse. We're only 4% of the American populations. Trans people are only 1%.
Yeah.
Talk about fear going to the wrong place. So yeah, we're going to let you know where to go, but know that you're not alone. And just in general, Jews for Peace is an organization that you can join and feel a lot of support around being both in the left and Jewish.
Yeah, the events recently, or the past year or two, has been complicated by the long-standing anti-Semitism in our country and in the world. It makes it even more difficult for people to sift through their own thoughts. There are people that are trying to, in their way, help Palestinians, people in Gaza, but haven't wrestled with their own anti-Semitism to know how to talk about being pro-Palestine or being in support without also giving into this pre-programmed anti-Semitism. It seems, not everyone, of course, but it seems that way to me. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, it is blatant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then a lot of my Jewish friends are like feeling like they, feeling completely isolated, feeling totally overwhelmed by the anti-Semitism, that nobody is thinking about the experience of the Israeli hostages, and they feel.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of like, well, I won't go into it, but I won't go into specifics, but it's like accusing Seattle Christians for some action of a government that is associated with Christianity in another. You know what I mean? It's like, anyway. Middle-tier patron Sarah from North Carolina. She says, "Hey, Kirk, I'm reaching out for advice about how to stay connected with my parents who think I'm living in sin with my same-sex partner. There's a dearth of practical and healthy advice about how to handle this kind of family dynamic. The primary issue is that my parents are rude to my long-term girlfriend. They treat us very differently than they treat my other siblings and their significant others. My partner has never been invited to a family vacation or holiday. My parents light up when my sister's boyfriend comes around. They ask him about his life, his job, his hobbies, but they hardly show the same interest in my partner. My mother is distraught over my sexuality. She has sobbed to me about it a number of times. She thinks that I am headed down a dangerous path and that Satan has a foothold in my heart. I'm about to tell her
Satan.
I'm about to tell her that I am not coming around to big family gatherings where my partner isn't invited. My partner and I are talking about marriage and having kids. That might mean, if I draw this boundary, that my family, my parents, would have no contact with their own grandchildren, my children. But I'm wondering if I'm overreacting. I'm wondering if you have any general advice. Have you treated queer clients with families like mine, Rebecca?"
Yeah, this is a heartbreaking reality. This is why the term chosen family exists.
Right.
Is that people have to distance themselves from their birth families for any number of reasons, but one of those reasons is homophobia and heterosexism.
Yeah, there was a time in the 90s when I first started hearing chosen family that if you were gay, it was basically a given that your family was going to disown you, and therefore chosen family was just an automatic thing that was just going to happen. I remember that. It's different now. Of course, it still happens. So yeah, this is a known thing. And I wonder actually if middle-tier patron Sarah from North Carolina is a bit confused about this, or doesn't have, because Sarah went online and there's not a lot of practical or healthy advice, because a lot of younger people don't experience this as often.
So find some older queers. My advice is
they'll be like, let me tell you.
I mean, this is why there are also gay hubs and gay neighborhoods, right? Because you moved away from your family and you had to start over.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I have to say, like, some people don't change. One of the people that I care about most in the world, I think, is finally cutting off her mom. Same story. Both siblings are gay. The mother allows neither of their partners into their house, and lives this false narrative that she has two children who are single.
Yeah.
So homophobia really destroys lives, and this is why the term "the closet" exists, is that people used to pretend that they weren't gay in order to avoid this type of being abandoned by people that they loved.
Right. They would have roommates and
yes,
special friends or something.
Yes.
Yeah. This is also a broader topic that I talk with a lot of clients about, because our society is so backward when it comes to the general notion of rejecting your parents for whatever reason, whether it's because of this or religious differences in general. Even among cis straight people can essentially experience the same rejection and hurt. It's complicated because from the outside, it's easy to say, well, just draw a boundary and live your life, and that sucks, but, you don't need to take that shit. And that's probably what Sarah is running into, is people just saying that because it's so easy to say. But I have worked with so many clients for so many
hard.
years that it's essentially impossible for most people to do that. It's a huge loss, one. Two, for most people, it's just not really what they ultimately want to do, even when they're looking at it objectively. So, meaning that they're like, yeah, I'm not going to, like with Sarah, I'm not going to change my mom. She's going to church every Sunday, or she's watching Fox News or whatever. Like, she's been brainwashed. I'm never going to be able to change that. Even if let's just go with that. That's not what Sarah's saying, but it could be. But even if we go with that assumption that Sarah's making, life and its meanings can sometimes dictate that contact is retained on some level. And where do you draw the line? Because there's no good answer is the thing. There's no answer where the outcome is all hunky dory. Every decision that you make carries with it pain and complications. And
to be in a situation where you both have history and you love someone and you're like, this person isn't safe. I mean, I did this dance with my mother for 52 years, where I would show up every once in a while and like we would try and do some act of normalcy, and then something really bad would go down. And
she wasn't against you being gay.
She was just crazy.
Yeah, she had issues of self-centeredness and
chaos.
Yeah, and harming those around her. And you have specific trauma from your childhood that would be reminded, you'd be reminded of it as that would happen. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really hard.
And so you had to draw boundaries.
Yeah. So intense boundaries.
Yeah. But you didn't completely cut off contact.
No. Yeah. Too hard for me. But like, this is something that you grieve for the rest of your life. Like if you lose a parent to homophobia or mental health or drug addiction, like you don't get over that shit. Like every holiday, every made up Hallmark holiday, every birthday, it crosses your mind that you don't have contact with that person and other people do. I'm always kind of astounded. People have these like intact, lovely families, and I'm like, oh, my family's a lot more complicated than that. That's not my story. And I have beautiful chosen family too. But I do think about like my own relationship with my child and how, I would do nothing to jeopardize that relationship. Yeah. And but that's not the case for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, I guess the analogy would be if your kid became a MAGA Trump supporter.
Oh, there was a while where he was totally into Ben Shapiro. This was like in his, this is like 12, 13. Like,
but I'm trying to think like, I'm sure you wouldn't be
this
like
actually
this.
happened to a friend of mine that their kid, they are queer, and their kid is like, I hate that you're gay. I hate that we're different. I just want to play sports, and can you not like embarrass me in any way? And they're like trying to sort it out. So yeah, kids reject parents, parents reject kids. This is not a Norman Rockwell painting. This is real life.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly complicated.
Yeah.
And people are estranged for, a really long time. There was a group that came up on Facebook, a processing group for people who aren't close to their families, for queer therapists. And I thought, oh my God, even though my mom has been gone for 2 years, would it be helpful for me to go to this group where I can tell my story and explain, what my life looks like with other people who have similar stories?
Yeah. The only thing I'll add is that it's complicated. It's a journey. Every option, every road from complete cutoff to the status quo is difficult, and it's a struggle. And the clients that I work with, we talk about this half of the time in therapy for years, basically forever,
Yeah.
And because that's just the only way, really. And
therapy,
it seems like there'd be an easy answer of just like, well, just just draw a boundary or just let it go or something. And it's like, you just can't. There's no way to do that.
Well, and it's, a wound that gets flared up over and over and over again. Yeah. And so I would say if you end up going partial contact or no contact, know that it's okay that you grieve for years and years and years. You get no judgment here. Yeah. It's psychology in Seattle. If you are unable to be in contact with an old friend or a family member, we understand that these are deep, deep wounds. Yeah.
And do not let it get under your skin as a measure of your value as a child.
Yeah.
Which might mean you have to limit contact just because of that one question. One more email. Patron Andrea from North Carolina. She says, I've worked as a therapist for a few years now. And, I've worked with my therapist for a few years now, and she has helped me a lot. In a recent session, I found out she has really concerning views about transgender people. For me, this was heartbreaking, as my spouse is trans non-binary. And I realized at that moment why talking to her about my spouse had felt uncomfortable in the past. Basically, she told me she believed trans people are mentally ill, that hormone therapy is dangerous, and that non-binary people are extreme and alarming. And that non-binary people are an extreme and alarming fad. That's her exact words. She also said she believes these options won't affect our sessions because I'm not the only one who is trans. I told her I didn't feel comfortable continuing our sessions, but that I wanted a few days to make a final decision. Am I wrong in thinking that our mindset and lack of concern about bias is a red flag? Is this mindset about trans people common among therapists? Rebecca, what do you think?
I don't think you can continue to work with this therapist, and you are correct in that her bias, it's beyond bias. It is her bigotry. Transphobia.
Yeah.
There's no way that it will allow you to feel safe with her. And what else does she think is wrong? And sadly, this happens in therapists. That class that I told you about was all about helping therapists not be like this, but some therapists still are. And this extreme personal bias, bigotry, it's going to make the relationship unworkable. It's really sad that she doesn't seem to understand that it would impact, that the therapist doesn't understand why it would impact the client.
I mean, one of the things that I've reckoned with, being a podcaster in particular, because people email in a lot of these kinds of experiences with bad therapists, that I have reckoned with and realized that there's a lot of shit-ass therapists out there. It's like, I don't know any of these people.
I always want to ask, where were they trained? I want more information.
They could have been sitting right next to us in class. I think.
know.
It's just not a guarantee. I think the thing that I've had to mourn is this assumption that if you have gone through the training and you've heard all the conversations and you've absorbed what's going on around you and you care, then there's no way that you could have a point of view like that. But, I was basically disabused of that at internship. So, it happens. I mean, my answer's a little bit different from Rebecca's in that you didn't tell us why you're in therapy, Andrea. If it's complicated because finding a good therapist that you work well with is actually really hard. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't consider, it sounds like you're already deciding that you want to leave. Absolutely. There's a lot of reasons to do that. Primarily what Rebecca's saying is well, you're not safe. One, two, if she thinks that, God knows what else she's thinking, and therapists have a tremendous amount of influence on their clients. And so you might not even know how the bigotry or other sorts of lack of I don't know, intelligence or wisdom or non-bigotry,
empathy
is, you don't know how these other things could be affecting you. But the broader question will be asked to me sometimes in that, I found out that my therapist, voted for a Republican governor of my state or something. What do I do? And it's complicated. It's not automatic that if your therapist agrees with you on every single political idea, that they are going to be a good therapist. Now, I'll say that bigotry is not a political thing. It's politicized, but transphobia isn't a political notion like low taxes or something. It's just bigotry. It gets associated with certain politicians, of course, because they're playing into the culture wars, and that's what gets them votes. And they also probably hold those bigoted notions. But I think every situation has to be, because even more broadly is, what if you have a friend that has these point of views? I think for most people, and in my circle anyway, will say, at least on paper, well, you got to get rid of that person. Or if you go on a Tinder date with someone that has what you consider to be an opposing point of view, this notion of just like, well, then that's a red flag you have to reject. And of course, if that's how people want to do it, then absolutely, I would support that. But for me personally, I will if it comes to that, but it's not my automatic thing. I try to take it in consideration in the bigger picture. For example, for me, if I had a therapist that I found out had this point of view, it would be extremely alarming. I just have to say, because I just be like, what the fuck is wrong with you that you would have, I'm trying to go back to what Andrew was saying. Let's see. That trans people are mentally ill. What? So, but the other thing is, if I'm just trying to think of a scenario where I would stick with a therapist like this. Hard to imagine, but if I just use this thought experiment, if I felt like I had a pretty good ability to measure that the overall therapy for me with this person was actually helping me, and it was the style of therapy that I might actually have a hard time finding in another therapist that I can afford or something that's in my network, like I might at least try to stick it out and just avoid talking about that topic.
Right, but
or even just confronting my therapist and just saying,
every time. What's just so interesting is, how can you not talk about your intimate partner in therapy?
Yeah.
It's going to set up.
But does it come up every time? Does the therapist, every time you bring up your partner, does your therapist like cringe and say something horrible? Well, they said
in the email, there was tension. I didn't know why it felt weird every time I brought so they're feeling it. Yeah. But yeah, it is hard. Someone came to me. We did the interview. They said they wanted to work with me. And then they said, no, I don't want to work with you because you're not IFS trained. And I was like, that's so interesting. So there are people who are looking for very specific things. So maybe, like you said, if you're looking, if you're doing EMDR and you're really working through something. But yeah, long-term, this is going to be really difficult because that's actually a workshop exercise on heterosexism, is you ask a bunch of straight people to talk about their weekend for 5 minutes and never bring up their partner. And people can't do it. Your average queer person can do it, no problem, because they've been trained to do it. But, asking someone to never talk about their partner is really asking a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, overall, it's probably wise to highly consider moving on to a therapist. But the general question I find to be much harder to answer, especially when it comes to these kind of relationships, because she said 3 years she's been working with this therapist and it's going well. That's kind of a rare thing. Anyway, one more very quick email.
Okay, and then I got to go soon.
Anonymous patron from New York, because it relates to all this. Anonymous patron from New York, he says, "Hi, Kirk. I'm a transgender man living in the United States. I am personally somewhat inconsolable post-election with the increasingly clear public hatred of trans people. What advice would you give trans people as they navigate new levels of public bigotry? Does research say anything about how to meaningfully dissuade people of bigotry? What would you want to say to someone early in the stages of being radicalized into aggressive transphobia?" There's a longer email here, but for the sake of time, Rebecca, what do you think?
What would I say to someone? So Laverne Cox just went on TV, and a lot of people are talking about what she said. That, she was really talking about how the current wave of transphobia, we are demonizing 1% of the population. And is there really any trans person in your life that is causing the price of eggs to go up to $15? Is making your neighbors get deported?
Well, I like this style of thinking because this is what I always think to these people, both on immigration and with trans, because that was what Trump won on. And there will be people that will ask these people. They'll ask them, "Okay, what are you passionate about?" And they'll say, Mexicans crossing the border and trans people ruining America or something. And then you ask them, has that happened to you? Has it, well, no, it's happening in wherever where they're eating cats. Okay, well, but has it happened to you? And they'll say like, no, I live in rural Wisconsin and it's all white people and what they would think to be cis and straight people, even though their next door neighbor, who knows what's happening for them in terms of oppression and staying in the closet. But anyway, similarly with trans people, it's like, when was the last time someone or it happened to you directly where a trans person entered into a bathroom and assaulted somebody? Because that's what they think is happening. You ask the average American, or at least of a certain ilk, and they believe that half of trans people are trying to get in the bathrooms to assault children, literally. And you're just like, just ask yourself, has it happened to you? And go beyond the echo chamber. So yeah, the kinds of things that they're worried about, it's just so absurd. Every trans person that I know and have heard of is just quietly trying to live their life. They don't want, they deserve to speak out and to be visible and to push back. But this is just anecdotal, but every trans person that I know is just putting their head down and trying to survive. And they're not trying to change anyone's mind.
Right.
They just want to be themselves as them, and they don't want to be harmed. And if anything, they're too accommodating to everyone around them.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Right.
Not that I'm criticizing, but I'm just saying, like, they're not imposing themselves on Republicans, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, the transgender ban for folks in women's sports. So think of all of the energy that went into that, all of the attention it got. It impacts 113 people in all of the United States.
Right, exactly. That kind of shit. Anyway, bless you.
Yeah, it's wild and scary to watch. So I would just so Seattle Children's it hit the papers sometime last week, and then I heard from a friend that there was a huge protest at Seattle Children's Hospital. I heard there was a huge protest in New York City. My friend who went to the protest at Seattle Children's said they cried 4 times. So really gather, find your community. Don't isolate. Know that some people have, if they've really gotten radicalized in this, it will take them a while to unwind. But that, fear-mongering is a real thing. Like, everyone should be reading up on the McCarthy era, big time. Because America does this over and over and over again. I'm even thinking about in Stranger Things, the way, like, D&D paranoia of the 80s, like devil worship. We can get real riled up in this country about something that's not actually happening.
Yeah, and whenever we progress, there's always a backlash. But the arc of history bends towards justice, right?
Yes.
And if there wasn't a backlash, then we would not be progressing.
Right.
And we would not be progressing fast enough. So it sucks, but don't let it demoralize you. Without the backlash, there wasn't a backlash on trans people 10 years ago because there wasn't progressive movement enough. Mm-hmm. We have reached a point where the average American just even knows the words trans and cis. That was not the case 10, 20 years ago. This is evidence of progress, and we just have to keep going and don't be demoralized.
And know that there are true periods of insanity in this country. Do you know that Charlie Chaplin was deported from the United States for being a member of the Communist Party and didn't step foot back in America for 30 years?
He went to France or something.
He went to England.
Oh,
yeah.
England.
Do you know that he didn't have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame because there was such a backlash perceiving him as a communist?
Right.
Right. Like, we could make ourselves really, really nuts about something that's not actually happening. Mm-hmm. And it can be incredibly painful to be with the people who are brainwashed. I really encourage everyone to look up McCarthyism and watch all those videos and watch people get accused of being communists.
So not only is it completely normal and unfortunately true about human nature and human systems that things like this happen, but to me, the non-demoralizing aspects of it is every time we have gone through these convulsions, generally speaking, we've come out on the other end on the right side of history, whether it's civil rights or the vote for people or feminism. We're talking about Ms. and Mrs.
Right, the ADA, American Disabilities Act.
Yeah, in the past, it can look like it looks quaint, like when they came up with Ms. that everyone was happy with it. No, it was a small minority of women that said, "Here's what we want to do," and most men and a lot of women were against it, and the message that it gave. So. Don't be demoralized is the thing, and keep fighting. And I have total confidence in our society that we will get through this, and we will prevail, and we'll be on the right side of history.
Yeah, and gather with community. And if you feel like it, go out in the streets and fucking make a scene with a bunch of other people who are saying this is not okay.
Yeah,
I won't let this define my story, my kid's story.
And also, don't believe on your echo chambers clickbait that will tell you that everything is bad and that all Americans, things are changing and attitudes are changing and we're moving forward. That's what being old for me gives me is I've been through this cycle so many times with so many of these issues.
And half my friend circle is trans and non-binary. So this idea that there's huge sections of America that never have met a trans person, of course they fear it. I can tell you as someone who's surrounded by it all day, every day, it's great. Don't be afraid.
That does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you're worth it and it's really scary out there and we have you in our hearts.